My name is Erin Miller, and I'm a genetic counselor in the Division of Cardiology at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. CCHMC collaborates in many ways with the University of Cincinnati, which offers me the opportunity to provide genetics care for patients and families, both with and at risk for cardiomyopathy, across the lifespan, really from infancy to adulthood. I'm going to talk with you today about genetic testing and what you can expect if it's recommended for you and your family. Let's start by talking about the goal of genetic testing. The purpose is really to identify gene variants that may contribute to cardiomyopathy risk. A gene is simply a basic unit of heredity, and it is made up by a specific DNA sequence. Some genes are really small and some genes are really big. All these genes do is code for proteins that are important in different parts of the body. Humans have around 20,000 genes. Not all of these, of course, are important in the heart. There does remain a little bit of debate on the exact number of genes. When genetic testing is performed, an individual's DNA, your DNA, is compared to what we call a reference sequence. And this reference sequence is a standard representation that's created from multiple individuals, not one single person. A gene variant is something that's different than what's represented in that reference sequence. Gene variants may be referred to by different names. Sometimes they're called a mutation, or sometimes they're called a gene change. All of these terms are okay to use. It is important to note that not all gene variants, even really rare ones, are important for our health. Some of them are just part of normal genetic variation. What are the different types of genetic tests that might be offered for genetic cardiomyopathy? So most individuals with cardiomyopathy will have what we refer to as gene sequencing. This term is used for the type of test that would look for a variant or a change in the DNA code. Typically, the first line of test would be to do a gene panel, and this panel just refers to a group of genes. A panel may be small, maybe 5 to 10 genes, or could be much larger, anywhere from 50 to 100 genes. And the genes included on this panel are specifically selected because there's good evidence that links that gene to a specific type of cardiomyopathy. People might have a targeted cardiomyopathy panel, like a dilated cardiomyopathy panel or a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy panel, or they may have a more comprehensive panel that looks at all of those genes together. There is more comprehensive testing beyond panel-based testing, and these two tests are referred to as exome sequencing and genome sequencing. So exome sequencing looks at a small but very important part of your DNA, which includes most of the known disease-causing variants. So an exome looks at about 1 to 2% of all of your DNA. And this includes those 20,000 genes that we know humans have. Genome sequencing actually looks at all of your DNA, nearly 100%. But the challenge is that we often don't understand how to interpret most of the variants that happen in our DNA. So while genome testing is available, we're still learning how to utilize that information in the clinical setting. The third type of genetic test that's most often offered to individuals with or at risk for cardiomyopathy is referred to as cascade genetic testing. And this testing is for a specific genetic variant that's already been found in the family. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. So what is involved with the genetic testing process? What can you expect if genetic testing is recommended for you or someone in your family? The first step in the process is to discuss the genetic testing options with a genetic counselor or knowledgeable healthcare provider. They can help identify the best person in the family or people in the family for whom genetic testing is appropriate and can make a recommendation about what test would be best. The second step is to collect a sample. This is probably the easiest part of the process. Many different sample types can be used for genetic testing. The most common are blood, or a saliva or cheek swab sample can be used for genetic testing. Many of these samples can be collected from your home with a test kit that's mailed to your house, and then you mail back to the laboratory. The third step is for that sample to be sent to a trusted genetic testing laboratory to complete whatever test was requested. Not all genetic testing laboratories are the same, and some labs are better at certain tests than others. So ensuring that you talk with your healthcare provider about the right laboratory is important too. The next part is waiting. It takes a little bit of time to complete the genetic testing. A panel-based test usually takes around 2 to 4 weeks. An exome or genome-based test can take longer, maybe a few months. Then you should receive the genetic testing report that would list any specific variants that were found in you or your family. You should absolutely have the opportunity to talk with a healthcare provider about the testing results. Genetic testing is not meaningful if you don't understand them and your healthcare providers don't have access to them. The other important piece is to make a plan for periodically reviewing your genetic testing results. There isn't an exact time frame for which this is recommended, but usually every 2 to 3 years is a good time point to consider revisiting the results. Sometimes a variant that was previously reported, we might have new information about it. Maybe there was new research published in the medical literature or new knowledge that would change the recommendations that would accompany that type of genetic change. So periodic review is important. Why does genetic testing matter? Why is it important for individuals with cardiomyopathy? Well, especially for individuals who might have cardiomyopathy for an unknown reason. It's what we refer to as idiopathic. Genetic testing may give us an answer. It may confirm a cause and explain why someone has heart disease. Secondly, it can provide insight into disease risk and guide care. Some genes are known to be associated with a higher risk for heart rhythm problems, for example. So the healthcare team might make a different decision about the timing or appropriateness, say, for implanting a defibrillator, an ICD. Other genes, actually, like CSRP3, are associated with a much later onset, less severe type of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So we may need to not screen individuals as often if that is the identified risk in the family. Genetic testing can also inform treatment decisions. So there are an increasing number of targeted therapies for individuals that are based on their genetic testing results. Some of these genes include LMNA or TTR, which can cause cardiac amyloidosis. And finally, genetic testing can allow us to better understand risk for cardiomyopathy in the family. So it can allow for understanding which family members may be at risk for developing cardiomyopathy and should initiate heart screening. And it can also remove risk. So for someone who has a strong family history of cardiomyopathy, if we can confirm that they don't have the genetic variant found in the family, they may not need heart screening at all. Powerful information really either way. One common question that we're often asked about genetic testing is, do I need another test? How many genetic tests should I have? Or should my genetic testing be repeated? The first step is to think about who in the family has had genetic testing and was it the most informative person? The most informative person in whom to initiate genetic testing is usually the person that is most affected or most severely affected. So this might be the person that was diagnosed at the youngest age, or maybe the person that ended up needing a heart transplant. And sometimes who the most affected person is may change. Family history information changes over time. The second thing to consider when thinking about whether additional genetic testing is needed is how long ago was your genetic testing done? Genetic testing options and technology continue to change and improve. So if genetic testing was completed many years ago, it might be quite reasonable to repeat the genetic testing. Maybe there are new genes that have been identified that are now on the gene panel. It may just be, though, that the technology is better now and could potentially identify a variant that might have been missed before. Another thing to consider is that if the genetic testing was negative initially, but this individual and their family's history is really suggestive of a genetic cardiomyopathy, maybe more comprehensive testing is needed, like an exome or a genome. Another trigger for considering additional genetic testing would be if your own personal medical history has changed. Maybe there's a new heart finding or something else going on that changes the way we're thinking about possible causes. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about cascade genetic testing. This term we use in genetics just describes the process of testing family members after a gene mutation has been identified in an affected individual. This type of testing usually only looks at a single gene or the specific gene mutation that's already been found in the family, and it can tell us if a family member is at risk or not. Family members who have cardiomyopathy and family members who don't should both be offered cascade genetic testing. It's never good to make assumptions and assume, oh, well, my brother has cardiomyopathy, so he obviously has the same gene mutation. We would recommend testing him to confirm that, because if by chance he tests negative, that might make us think that he could have a different genetic cause for his cardiomyopathy, and maybe a gene panel would be more appropriate for him. So testing affected family members to confirm that that gene variant kind of tracks with the heart muscle disease in the family is really important. When we think about cascade genetic testing, most of the time, family members have a 50% risk of inheriting whatever gene mutation is found in the family. But a genetic counselor or knowledgeable healthcare provider can give family members information about what their specific risk of testing positive for the family gene mutation, what their specific risk might be. It may be 50%, it may be 25%, and this particular risk depends on how that gene variant is inherited in the family. So what is the inheritance pattern? And it also depends on how closely related that individual is to the person who had positive genetic testing. So we can provide you with a specific risk assessment about what are the chances that your genetic testing result will be positive. So to summarize, genetic testing is an important part of medical care for individuals with different types of cardiomyopathy. The genetic testing results can inform care for the individual and provide important information about risk for family members. And genetic testing technology and test options continue to change, and it's important to periodically review previous test results and new testing options.
This video is part of a series of educational videos developed by the Genetic Cardiomyopathy Awareness Consortium and brought to you by the DCM Foundation. Our goal is to connect you with the leading experts in the field of cardiomyopathy to further your understanding of this disease and to provide resources to help you manage your care. Thanks for watching.